In such a short amount of time, we've witnessed the massive proliferation of AI and its use in the world. It seems to be involved in every major part of our lives, from spyware to new technologies, and even in the ways we conduct war. But with all of this, we have yet to seriously look into the ethics behind all of the technological advancements we are seeing. In this podcast, I will be analyzing the different authors and their text and giving my opinions about their ideas on the ethics behind the advancement of technology. To start with, John R. Cook's Death by Technology makes the main argument that technologies have slowly been killing humanity. In chapter 6, he points out some of the flaws that people have when developing technologies, thinking of it from a perspective of science fiction rather than, which leads to them making things which are used in horrific and unintended ways. In a section of his book, he makes a point that many technologies that we have were inspired by science fiction. Seems as though he's implying that the lack of foresight, philosophy, and ethical thinking leads to scientists attempting to develop technologies which cannot or should not exist. People end up being killed by the inventions they made with the intent to improve the quality of overall life. Perhaps any potential consequences get brushed off in favor of what potentially could be. Of course, this thinking is exactly what leads to the these problems and catastrophes. In Silicon McDonald's and Inquirer's Guide to Ethics in AI, they focus on explaining to their audience how to think ethically and apply this thinking to artificial intelligence. They break down things such as how to make ethical decisions, going into things like reflective moral thinking and moral principles. It goes into the limits that ethical thinking has when taking artificial intelligence into the consideration. I think that the points made in the text were rather interesting. I never considered the amount of things that needed to be taken into account when making ethical decisions, and how these things can change when artificial intelligence is thrown into the equation. Since artificial intelligence has only ramped up in recent years, there isn't any sort of ethical framework that we can fall back on to distinguish how good or bad the use of artificial intelligence, how a good or bad use of artificial intelligence is, in the same way that we can distinguish a good doctor from a bad one. I personally agree with this sentiment, as it can be difficult to understand where the ethical barriers are when using artificial intelligence, aside from breaching the privacy of individuals, which many private organizations don't seem to care about. Similarly to one of Cook's points, I think that the major problem with ethical thinking involving artificial intelligence is the fact that many people in control of it aren't interested in even considering the serious potential ramifications of artificial intelligence. They would rather focus on the money it can bring or the potential time-saving costs of it. Generative artificial intelligence, while still young, is growing at such an alarming rate. People can make fake photos that look incredibly real, and people online have mistaken many videos and photos made by AI as things made by or taken by human hands. Although it isn't a problem right now, this could easily develop and be used in very insidious ways. It could even change the way that we look at evidence in the future. Things once considered to be rock-solid proof can now be waved away with the statement that it's just AI. In Noel Sharkey's The Automation and Proliferation of Military Drones and the Protection of Civilians, the main argument being made is to consider the unspoken dangers of the proliferation of unmanned aerial vehicles and the ethics behind the usage of uncontrolled robots for war. Sharkey makes the claim that with the increasing rise of UAVs, it's only a matter of time before we end up fighting wars with automatons. Many countries are working toward this large opening of technological advancement in the hope that they will be the first to get a large share of control over it. From the east to the west, every major country is trying to get the largest piece of this war pie. Sharkey focuses primarily on the ethics of using robots for war and how their future inclusion will change the way we look at war and those involved. How will the U.S. and other countries use these unmanned machines? How will they be considered as an act of war or an action short of war? Another point that Sharkey brings up is the fact of how in the future Will these robots possibly be able to tell enemy combatants from civilians? It isn't difficult to imagine that governmental powers will be more focused on getting these machines up and running rather than focusing on ensuring they won't hurt any civilians in the areas that they're sent to. I imagine it would be incredibly difficult for a robot to do so. What would they even be able to use to distinguish civilians from other combatants? If that's the case, wouldn't enemies use tactics to avoid or confuse them in order to fight against them? What would be the point if everyone used robots to fight each other? Overall, I think that is a rather interesting thing to read about. I think that Sharkey makes some very good points about the proliferation of unmanned weaponry and the potential future consequences that it can bring. Of course, while I understand it isn't a good idea to fall back in the global arms race, it is also important not to leap before you look, especially in cases like these. While still far off, it's easy to see a future in which warfare is done through the uses of unmanned robots sent into war zones to fight our battles for us. We want to fight war. If we want to fight wars in any sort of ethical way, we need to make sure that we prioritize having our weapons seek and destroy their intended targets without killing civilians and other non-combatants. In conclusion, I think that many of these resources make good points on the ethical usage of AI. There are many ways in which AI is being developed for the express purpose of invading our privacy or for the use of warfare. I believe that those with the monopoly on AI should take a moment to stop and seriously consider and seriously ask themselves whether they are making the right decisions and whether they are ready to live with the consequences of the way AI is implemented in the future. I also believe that we as individuals should make our stances clear on the idea of AI systems potentially being used to watch over every moment of our lives. I think that we shouldn't be so willing to sit back and let our right to privacy be destroyed by companies and governments working together against us. Thank you for listening and have a good day.